Hello, 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 hello. Welcome to the 10 Things channel. You're so blessed to be here. Here we deal with anything and everything biblical, black empowerment, controversies with the black empowerment movement, and saying we clarify every and anything. You can call me the philosopher, you can also call me elder. I respond to any of them. What are we doing? We are continuing with the series I started on black empowerment and the controversies that surround it. Today, in the series, it's a second part to a message that I spoke to earlier, which was about the doctrines or messages that the mentally enslaved African likes to preach to others. And you'll be fascinated. Please, if you have not seen the part one, please get it. You need it. Now, what is the first thing we're talking about in this particular video? One of the first things such enslaved Africans like to preach to others is that it was whites who introduced us to Christianity. Please, I don't care what title. I don't even care if you're a history professor. If you believe that it was whites who introduced Africans to Christianity, you are wrong. Not only are you are wrong intellectually, factually, and you are wrong mentally. It means you do not know your history. Go and check it out. Africans, as far as 300 AD, were helping determine doctrine. Africans were involved in the canonization of the Bible. That's the extent to which we have been there from the beginning. So don't let anyone deceive you into believing that Africans were introduced to the Gospels were introduced to us actually at a later date after the Europeans have had it for years. It can be further from the truth. So don't believe it. It is a message only the mentally enslaved African preaches. It's not true. Now, the second thing the mentally enslaved African likes to tell himself or tell others is that um, the Africans or blacks are consumers and not inventors or producers. In fact, for many of these people, the act of invention, the act of production, the act of bringing something to this world is only something white people do. We as Africans usually do the consumption of it. That is only from the one from an ignorant person. You see, the fact that they say something is made in the USA does not mean it was made by whites. The fact that they say something was made in Houston or something was made in Canada does not mean it was made by whites. Please, all of these nations have blacks there too. So there are many, but there's one man that actually came out with over 3,000 different inventions from groundnut alone. You know, as far back as before the First World War, there were black companies producing cars. Cars. How many people were producing cars in the 1950s, 1960s? They were producing cars. In fact, and we didn't know this until there was a controversy. Every time the African does something, it is quickly hidden, all because there's already a false narrative. There's already a fake history that is at play, and many people have tried severally to cover the history. You see, you watch um, Moses, and instead of going before a black pharaoh, Moses goes before a Caucasian pharaoh. If you're unfortunate, then they will give you an Arab pharaoh, and then to color it a bit to give it still its blackness, then the security guard by the pharaoh will be black. And you are wondering, asking yourself, how, if it is not that Africans were sent to America, how on earth, even with that, how many times do you see a white president who is guarded by a black African? I mean, because for every person, for every king, it is your best man or your best man, or normally what they call your strong man who got you, who's your personal bodyguard. And such people are usually like you. Because if the other people have risen to produce the best man, you will be sitting in that seat because then they will overthrow you. And yet for some bizarre reason, Hollywood is able to do black guards with a white pharaoh, and nobody questions it. In the same way that CNN can bring, you know, a British in Oxford who is an African expert, and yet they would never bring an African who is an expert on Pittsburgh or expert in London. It should sound absurd. How can African be an expert on things concerning London or things concerning Buckingham Palace? And yet easily they keep inviting experts from Oxford, whites, who are experts in things African. And they are talking about African issues, and yet there are white people talking about it too confidently. The absurdity of it. Now, so irrespective of what you have been told, it's only the mentally enslaved person who believes that Africans are not inventors. We've invented so many things, from traffic light to how to, store blood. I mean, the list is endless. It's all kinds of things have been invented by Africans. The fiber optics, Dr. Mensa. I mean, all kinds of things. I mean, how to do packet switching, the very fundamental that makes the internet possible, that makes the sending of data possible. A Nigerian American came up with that. But you will not know that, would you? Or you will know that maybe it was Intel, the one that bought the rights. It will be labeled as an Intel product. It will be labeled as a Microsoft product. It will be labeled as some major corporation product. And because the leader of the corporation is white, it will be assumed that it must have been white people who produce it. Nothing could be further from the truth. It is like Korea, where they love black culture and yet they look down on blacks. I mean, it's you can't just marry the two. Why? Because such people cannot believe that the very culture they love so much, the hip hop culture, was an invention of blacks. Because, well, if it's coming from America, it must have been white. Just that blacks are the ones who express it the most. No, it's a mentally enslaved that thinks like that. It's a mentally enslaved that thinks like that, and no amount of hiding, no amount of, you know, denial, selective amnesia is going to erase that. So that's the second thing that the mentally enslaved African likes to tell himself. And then the third thing, and this is one of the saddest things. I even heard one politician in Nigeria say that some time ago. So whenever the African is frustrated with the rule of his fellow African, they seem to fantasize about some great rule, some great leadership of Europeans, simply because they were not alive at the time, or that maybe it's because they didn't understand what was going on during that particular period. They don't understand what was happening during this particular period. Imagine a situation where there's corruption. And what is the corruption? The government that is leading has taken some assets of the country and maybe taking them abroad. We are horrified. In fact, we find that unconscionable. How can you do that to your nation? What we forget is that all throughout the rule of those who were not us, they were doing worse things. In fact, they were not just taking some things, they were literally looting from every aspect of our national life. They were looting our gold, looting our diamond, looting. In fact, and they even, and earlier on, they even looted the human beings too. The strength of our nation. They looted them in their millions to go and do work for them for free for centuries. Imagine a government that has workers. Even the worst of African government has not done this. Government that put workers to work for the entirety of their life without pension, without pay. And yet somehow these uninformed, mentally enslaved Africans think that this rule was better than the rule of a corrupt African government, which is amassing wealth for its cronies. These people do not amass wealth for any African. They amass wealth for themselves and for their nations and left us in penury. As I said, you check out my other videos on leadership, and you understand that if it's come to leadership, all the gadgets, the people we mentioned, they were thieves and looters who looted us, and because we didn't have much in terms of information, we praised them, and we still have statues of them in our and pictures of them in our public squares and public places, and yet they did not account for all that they took from us, and they left us some little amount. After centuries of looting and centuries of mining, they left us just a few million pounds and left this country in a poverty stricken manner that has taken decades to fix and is still not being fixed. So, the idea of a better rule by white is an idea that can only be espoused by the mentally enslaved. Don't buy into it, it's a lie. Now, so colonial rule was never better than African rule. In fact, I was watching a documentary just recently, and we were talking about the reverse apartheid, where the situation where now whites are living in poverty, and then there are blacks who are actually now doing so well. You see, the whites there, and it was universal, and I was shocked. All the whites who are now living in poverty said the apartheid was better, though they believe the apartheid excluded more than 84% of the population from the public good. They believe it was better because because they are few or they were few, they could get jobs, and so for them it was better. It didn't matter that the rest of the population, in fact, the overwhelming majority, were destitute and didn't get anything. And I said it in some of my other videos. You can check it out. You know, either top there or yeah, right. That if the situation that South Africa is in now, if that situation had been the situation that it was in now before 1993 or something, there would not have been a cry for apartheid to end. It would have been very fair. And yet here we have a situation where the very white that perpetuated this insane this insane discrimination against their fellow human beings are thinking that because now they cannot compete for jobs with blacks, because now they have to compete, there's no favoritism, they are at a disadvantage. Because now they live in the same shanty towns and shacks as blacks already are still living. And by the way, blacks are still living in those shacks in their millions. Why? Because after years of miseducation, after years of not being educated, they don't have the skills to get a job that have been created. So people from other nations, the Zimbabweans, from other South African nations, from other nations all over Africa, have gone in there to take over the job because they were educated. Right. This is the typical creation of an incompetent and wicked government. And yet, for some misguided people in Africa, such and these were all leadership led by white people. What was wrong with that leadership having a country which was good for both the white and the black? What was so wrong with them having a country where whites and black had equal opportunity? Why was it necessary for them to suppress a majority of the people so that only a minority would benefit? And you call that leadership better? You're talking about nepotism? Are you talking about a nepotistic government in your African country? Or are you talking about, did you say gang related violence? Can you compare that with the segregation in the United States and the violence that went with it, where you could not walk on the same pavement with a white person? Can you compare that with the kind of atrocities committed in the name of apartheid in South Africa? And all of these governments were led by white. Is that to you a better government than the current government you're having? Is that a better government? No, it's not a better government. It's not a better government. And the idea that all government led by white produce riches and produce wealth is also a big lie. And somehow Africans, have this notion. If that was the case, then Latin American countries they all be rich because incidentally in Latin America too, most of the government, not all, are led by white. I think it was in Bolivia recently that they had a Morales or something, and indigene becoming the president. So it is not true that whites were doing better at managing our countries and we have come and you have messed it up. It's a notion that is false and that must be rejected with all the force it deserves. They did not leave any country, developed country. Sometimes they talk about the situation of Zimbabwe. If you have a nation where most of the rich lands, most of the fertile lands are in the hands of just, I mean, 5 or 10% of the population, and the rest they're just going to school, they have nothing to do. I mean, what do you expect? And and the trick here is that when the land was forcibly taken from the whites and given to the blacks, the sanctions were then placed on the nation. And yet all that people talk about is the fact that Muhammad, the fact that Mugabe took a rich basket, a food basket of of, 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 of the Southern Africa and turned it into a basket case. That's a similar thing that was done to Haiti. Once Haiti was able to fight all of these armies, whether the French or the British, then they all gang up against them in trade so that they can make them an example of incompetent black leadership. Please, that man succeeded, whether I failed, in educating and all of Zimbabweans. But he had the highest literacy rate in all of Africa, one of the highest in the world. The fact that there were issues now with food production later on does not discount the leadership he led. Unfortunately, like many um, wrong notions Africans have, one of the wrong notions we've had, and we learned it from a colonial past, is that if somebody is a good leader, they must continue to be done until he dies. No, that kind of leadership is not the right leadership. And so I put it to you once again, dear viewer, there's only mentally enslaved people who think that the colonial rule was better than African rule. And then the ninth one, last but one was says that um, a message that the mentally enslaved likes to pass is that whites are more honest than blacks. Oh my God! At one time, I almost fell for this sham myself. But having known whites and having known what they've done, that they have not just told lies, they are still telling lies, but they have whole divisions of government that is set up to tell lies, and they have all kinds of funny names for propaganda and the rest, you know, advertising and lobbying and stuff. I mean, they have mastered in the act of telling lies to the point that they have graduated their lie telling into a situation where they call it a white lie. In other words, I mean, when they tell lies, it's fine, but if you tell a black lie, then it's dangerous. If in the very history of the world, they lie telling it. Who discovered what first? Who discovered America first? They lie telling it, and they themselves have your covered. Somebody lied to a point where he recreated a whole supposed prehistoric human being, and it was all a lie, and it was already in textbooks. The lies of the white man are legendary and well documented. Please, as I said in one of my videos, go check it out. Some of the wrong ideas we have about whites. Check it out. Some of the wrong ideas. This is the link is somewhere there. Wrong ideas, black hole about whites. It is not true. Whites don't tell lies. They are so good at it. It can hardly be detected. But they are so good at it, they see it everywhere. Now they have something they call fake news, where an entire news is a lie. And that is also their invention. So it is only the mentally enslaved who believes that whites are more truthful or honest than blacks. Such a lie. And lastly, the last message, the last doctrine of the mentally enslaved African is that blacks do better under white management. Oh my goodness me. In fact, clearly, it goes clearly in tandem with the previous one that whites are better managers, better leaders. Please, blacks like to work hard. So under any leadership where there is resources and where there's a clear vision, they thrive. Don't give people tattered, run down nations over two centuries of colonial rule and then tell them to turn around in 3 years or 2 or 3 decades. Otherwise, you call them incompetent leaders. Don't force upon us incompetent semi-literate leaders who only serve your interests and tell us all blacks are poor leaders. No, the companies that thrive and the white leadership are companies that have resources and know what they're about. It's not the color of the person. I've seen several, I know you too have seen several companies led by white that have collapsed. There are multi-billion companies led by white that have collapsed. So it is completely false to say, companies do better than white managers. The people that will do better are the white manager and the people that are mentally enslaved who think that, well, a black man is me, so I'll not, obey his instructions. He's my brother. But for a white man, he's superior to me, so I'll obey his instructions. If that's what you're talking about, then fine. But there is no scientific, there is no historical, in fact, there is no data that says that when you have a white management with a black company body, the company does well. It's only when you have dedicated workers that the company does well. So these are the last five, this is part two of the doctrines of the messages that the mentally enslaved African preaches or tells others. Share this message, please, and invite others to join you. We are working on ourselves after being abused for so long, and let us avail ourselves unto this newness. And the good Lord will liberate us. Do not be deceived. Do not be deceived. Nothing that has been done to us as a people is permanent. All we have to do is to decide not to let it remain in our life. And surely we will decide not to let it remain in our life. Indeed, we are more than conquerors, and we are as good as any race. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Subscribe, share the message, you know, call others to view, and above all, spread the word. We are as good as anyone. God bless you, and see you in my next video.